into the wonderful world of nuclear science and technology and how it can contribute to sustainable development. In addition, to our panel of experts, we have over 100 participants joining us today on Zoom and YouTube from countries across the globe and from fields ranging from regulators and researchers to policymakers. When the panelists have concluded their presentations, I will open the floor for questions and discussions. So please submit your questions through the Q&A function, not the chat function, the Q&A function. And if you're doing so, if you're joining us on Zoom, or submit your questions to events@vcdnp.org. If you're joining us on YouTube, that's events@vcdnp.org. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, Farah Al-Moufleh won't be able to join us today, but we are sure to have her on future panels. So now to our first panelist, Dr. Nortin Titus, and he is the Chief Scientist at Namibia's Department of Mines and Energy, and he'll talk to us about why developing countries need more access to nuclear technology. He is also the chairperson of the National Commission on Research, Science and Technology, a director at the Atomic Energy Board in Namibia and the Minerals Development Fund. And Nortin's interests and work is very much in geophysics, the Test Ban Treaty, as well as energy research. Nortin, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Ingrid. Thank you very much for the opportunity to bring a few arguments and a few thoughts on why peaceful uses are so important, peaceful uses of nuclear energy are so important, especially for the African continent. So I just quickly want to start sharing my screen here, and if everybody can see it, just quickly. Screen. I hope everybody can see it now. Is it in full screen mode? Yeah. Okay. So I'm really privileged to be with this panel of experts and discussing this topic. And I've chopped and changed it a little bit because so that it provides, it adds to the panel discussion. And of course, in this case, I've focused very much on the energy component. So a few years ago, in 2016, this article published in the Namibian caught my attention. As you can see, there's a little town, this off-grid town in Namibia, in the northeast corner of Namibia called Gum, that received a solar plant sponsored by government. And from his familiarization tour, our new Minister of Mines and Energy went and visited the plant. Of course, with a lot of media with him. Then in the article, it essentially says that the plant risks damage because it's not really being taken care of. Now, what caught my attention was actually the last paragraph in this newspaper article, because the chief headman in this village at the end was quoted as saying, "This electricity can't be used to cook or iron. And these are the primary reasons we wanted electricity. We are not happy." And I started looking deeper into this question and about electricity provision, specifically in my country. It turns out that in Namibia at present, 50% of our population actually uses wood to cook. I took a picture of this guy on his bicycle, you know, loaded up with wood, and it's a general sight in my country every single day. Such an extent that I think we've become a little bit numb to it. But these people go out early in the morning, men and women, gather wood and use that to cook a meal. They use that to feed their families. And they are dependent on the land to provide them that energy. Really, people around us are really, really scavenging for energy. And when you are cooking a meal, it's very different from charging a phone. got very different physics at play there. In the in the right-hand corner on the bottom, we see a very familiar site in Namibia where cooking usually takes place over an open fire. And we can see it's mostly the elderly that do the cooking. And you can just imagine that the particulates in this area are ingested or are inhaled. So, coupled to that, we also have a tradition where our children, who are 1, 2, or 3 years old, we often ship them off to the grandparents. First of all, for them to learn our traditions, and second of all, because we're working in the city. And these kids generally grow up with the grandmothers in these very conditions. So what's the impact of this? Well, you know, it shows Namibia currently is losing about 10% of its people through lower respiratory illnesses or tuberculosis. So about 10% of our population is just dying from these illnesses. If we compare that to Finland, that's 0.6%. So, you know, so what does it really matter? Well, the thing is that it's the poor that are suffering these deaths. And the poor don't have healthcare. They don't have, not healthcare, they don't have health insurance. So they go to the clinics, they go to the health, to the public health sector, adding an additional burden on the state to provide that care for the elderly and for the young. So we can immediately see how cooking not only places a strain on the environment, but also, you know, on civil services. Another site that we are seeing in our neighborhoods, okay, especially in the northeast part of Namibia, where our women still wash clothes in the rivers. This is a daily exercise, and you know, there's no new tricks you can teach in washing clothes. Hans Rosling had a very beautiful story that he told about the introduction of the washing machine in Sweden in the 50s, where he just highlighted that when they realized that there's a machine that does the washing, they had suddenly 5 hours on their hand. Women had 5 hours on their hands. What did they do with those 5 hours? Well, the interesting thing is that women actually started teaching themselves how to read. Why? Because they were the ones that took the kids to school, and they were the ones that came and picked up the kids from school. So after school, women actually were able to do the homework with the kids. It's quite amazing for me. I mean, it gives me chills when I think about it. Incidentally, research shows that women spend around $9 of every $10 on their families. So I'm convinced of the fact that women actually build productive societies, and you know, if anybody on the panel knows, they can take a chance and guess how much men spend on their families. But I'll save you the trouble. Men actually only spend $4 per $10 on their families. So it's really important to understand energy poverty in the context of Africa and who's actually suffering. It's the poor, it's the women, it's the children. And we see that in the World Energy Outlook in 2017, I don't think 5 years later has changed that, but in sub-Saharan Africa, 600 million people are still without access to electricity. 600 million. To put that in context, that's Europe times 2. And that's not just Europe, Western Europe, that's Western and Eastern Europe times 2. So it's an enormous amount of people that don't have access to electricity. And if we take clean cooking, you know, 850 million people. That means the US added to that. This is the amount of people that don't have access to clean cooking that are using wood to cook. And this is actually the scale that we are talking about. And as I've mentioned, you know, different physics is at play, because, you know, the fundamental laws of thermodynamics says, you know, that you can't create or you can't destroy energy, it only changes form. But it's the second law that's so interesting to us, because the second law actually says with every transformation, you know, it's going to cost us. And the story here is that all energy is free. We should make use of all energy. This is what we are saying, okay? Because every energy will help us in society. But making it useful, putting it in the form that we need, that's where the money is in. So 5 kilowatts of electricity will cook a meal for a family. And this is what we really need to think about, that not only will it cook a meal, but it takes women out of the woods. It takes people out of the woods for 5 hours. It reduces the time that they are in the field, by half a day. And that is what the power of electricity, of bringing electricity. So the World Energy Outlook in 2017 said, well, by 2040, Africa needs to add 1,000 terawatt hours to its grid. 1,000 terawatt hours, and people unfortunately don't have a feeling for what 1,000 terawatt hours is. And of this, 700, so 70% is just for cooking. But I'm going to try to put it in context very quickly. 1,000 terawatt hours is 5 South Africas. South Africa produces around 200 terawatt hours per year. That's 5. And South Africa is the biggest energy producer in Africa. So in 25 years or in 20 years now, we want to add 5 South Africas in energy production. And that is just to solve the basic needs. And how are we going to do it? Well, if we use the most stable form of energy that we know, which is nuclear, that equates to about 70 nuclear power stations, the size of Kubuk. Well, what's the rest of the world doing? Well, from our perspective in Namibia, we see that the rest of the world's demand for uranium is increasing. So this has increased in Namibia from threefold in the last 30 years. So contrary to popular belief, more and more people are turning to nuclear energy to address this issue of electricity access and of clean cooking. And certainly, in the 30 years, we've exported about over 100,000 tons of uranium, which would fuel about 8 power stations for a period of 100 years. And this is exemplified here. Namibia does not have its own nuclear power stations. It's only a supplier of the fuel. And we can see, this demand and the ability to produce the electricity, large amounts of electricity in a very, very short period of time. So in essence, we're turning out to be a net exporter of this fuel source. And just to bring it home for people, I've just shown the power of one nuclear power station compared to the land requirements that we would need for solar or for a wind park. And this is off the west coast of Namibia. So considering that there's this huge amount of electricity that needs to be added to the African grid, we need to consider also the land requirements, because Africa is one of those continents where the integration between the land and the people are very, very intriguing. Of course, nuclear takes up the least amount of space, and I've put this just as a small reflection of what this means in terms of our human footprint. So I think the solutions are there. Peaceful use, particularly nuclear energy, and once we get electricity to people, even just displace electricity, we can put a stop to energy scavenging, what I'm calling it, because people still move around where the energy source is. We can eliminate this energy poverty, and what the advocacy here for is this need for these peaceful uses is to not reject it, but just to add nuclear energy to our energy mix. So that's the message I wanted to bring across. Thank you.
Thanks, Nortin. You can unshare your screen. And while Nortin is unsharing his screen, I also just want to ask you, Nortin, to just mention you have this wonderful example of how other nuclear technology, like radiation of food, can contribute to food security. Can you talk a little bit about that as well, in terms of, I think it was the tomato and the wheat example that you gave, and then also just a bit about the contribution of nuclear technology to the medical environment.
Yeah. So from the side of the board, we've been looking at this issue, especially with fresh produce. And one of the issues is, of course, shelf life. So in Namibia, a lot of our fresh produce is very expensive to produce. Namibia is a desert country. We make use of groundwater. We've got dams for irrigation. But if you just harvest your produce and get it to market, we don't use, for example, irradiators, and Suresh will talk about that a little later. But we are thinking, or we are believing that if we were to irradiate that food or that fresh produce and remove all those bugs and pesticides within the fresh produce, we might extend the lifespan of that fresh produce, let's say from 3 days to 7 days. And what a difference 4 days makes, especially in a country like Namibia. If you come to Namibia, you'll drive a whole day from one end to the other. And it might take 2 days for people to get fresh produce from one side of the country to the other side of the country. So having an extra few days, first of all, allows the farmer to sell his produce. Secondly, it allows the customer to buy it. And thirdly, it allows the customer to have enough time to use it without the thing, like we call it in this part of the world, to go frot, which means for the thing to go bad. And once you have produce that continuously goes bad, your clientele won't want to make use of that. So this is something that we're really closely looking at, the irradiation of food and how it can contribute to food security. The other thing is, of course, the medical applications. In Namibia, we do around 6,000 procedures, nuclear medicine procedures. Now, that's way below the average for our population. For our population, we should do around 48,000 or 50,000 procedures per year. So this means that we are only servicing 12% of our population. What's happening to the other 88%? These are the people that don't have access to this technology, to this treatment. And in this case, once again, these people are just left to their own defenses, dying of old age, not even ever being diagnosed of having a cancer or even being able to be treated for that. And I mean, like Namibia, I'm sure the rest of the countries around Namibia, 20, 30 years ago, I think the life expectancy was around 52 or 53. Well, that has increased by a decade. So, increasing life expectancy by a decade, you're now starting to get into the zone where you are going to make more detections of cancer in patients. So it's really something that will catch up to us in the future. And this is vitally important that we introduce these technologies in our countries. So I hope, Ingrid, I've brought that.
That's perfect.
To the text. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Nortin. Thanks for illustrating so vividly why we need to do more to expand the benefits of peaceful uses for all countries. Energy poverty, food insecurity, and of course, lack of equitable access to healthcare are some of the acute global challenges we face. So now let's turn to the rest of our panel, who will tell us how Accelerator and X-ray technologies can provide sustainable option for improving access to nuclear science and technologies, and how they can contribute to research and innovation. Our next speaker is Dr. Valeriia Starovoitova. She has over 20 years of experience in applied nuclear physics, specifically uses of electron accelerators in both academic and industrial fields. In 2018, she joined the International Atomic Energy Agency as a Radiation Technology Coordination Officer, and her current work is focused on development and promotion of E-beam and X-ray based technologies for industrial purposes. So Valeriia will today talk to us about the IAEA's Conference on Accelerators for Research and Sustainable Development, from good practices towards socioeconomic impact, which took place recently. Thanks, Valeriia. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. It's my pleasure to talk to you and give you an update about the conference. Can you see the first slide of my presentation right now? Awesome. The conference took place in May 2022, so it's been a little bit over the month now, end of May. The four scientific secretaries, myself included, but also Sotiris Charopoulos, Danas Ridikas, and Selena Horak, we were all in charge of this event, and I would like to acknowledge their participation as well, even though they're not, I'm not sure if all of them are here right now. We had a very good conference, very nice conference, which was focused, unlike many other conferences, accelerator conferences, which are more scientific oriented. This particular one was not as much focused on scientific results, but it was also talking a lot about some applications and real life applications and the impact to society from the accelerator based research. There were a lot of success stories. There were a lot of case studies. What went well, what didn't go well. And basically, we had 4.5 days of various presentations to address the 7 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that IAEA is actively supporting, including zero hunger, good health and well-being, clean water, affordable energy industry, climate action, and partnership. So here you can see some screenshots from the conference. The conference was opening was, we had a very nice speech from our Director General. We had 3 DDGs. It was a very well attended event. And also from the personal perspective, it was just great to have in-person event after so many virtual events that unfortunately we all had to participate in. Oops. We had about 200 in-person participants, but we also had about 300 virtual attendees. So it was a hybrid event. We had participants from 72 IAEA member states with 6 plenary sessions that featured 16 keynote invited talks and then 16 parallel sessions with over 80 contributed talk presenters. We also had some side events I'm going to mention later, and some technical tours to 2 facilities here in Vienna. One is a medical facility, Medestron, with the proton beam used for treatment, cancer treatment, and another one was a Vera accelerator facility at the local university. We also had a poster session, and we accepted posters both from in-person participants and virtual, and we had some awards for young investigators. There are several links here where you can get more information about this conference and see more results. Several topics were of interest, even though I mentioned that the primary goal was to talk about case studies and socioeconomic impact, but we did talk about large-scale facilities, accelerator facilities, specifically the rare isotope beams, the facilities in the United States, in Japan, and France, and some other countries, where you use radioactive beams to study the nature, the fundamental physics and the nature of the nucleus, and you get a lot of information about some fundamental nuclear physics and strong interactions. We also had an amazing presentation about MIRP, a facility in Belgium, which is an accelerator-driven subcritical reactor. And we had a very good presentation about a radioactive ion collider when you have electrons and anti-electrons colliding into probe some fundamental physics questions more. This all might sound very complicated, and indeed it's a pretty good science, but at the same time, all these highly scientific experiments, they give a lot of information that can be used further for smaller scale commercialized facilities used both for medical applications, for industrial applications, for homeland security, and so on and so forth. So even though this might seem like a very high state of art and expensive facility to discuss, but they also have very practical applications in the end. Compact neutron sources was another very big topic, and now you can see the word compact. So from a very large, very expensive facility, we're going to something much smaller, and you can see some scales given here. This is a screenshot from one of the presentations where you can see that the source is from being about 15 meters, the unit, the accelerator unit, going all the way down to 5 meters to 3 meters and even 70 centimeters, which is really compact, like a tabletop unit that can be used for various applications, industrial applications. And again, these sources started, that's an example how something starts with a relatively big and complex idea, and then you can scale it down to still keep it functional and used for various commercial applications, but at the same time, you use the work and data and experiments that were done for large facilities. A lot of work has been done to show that these neutron sources can be compact. You don't really need a reactor, because usually people, when you tell them this is a neutron source, they think about a huge facility, they think about a nuclear reactor with uranium core. And here's an example where you can show that, okay, you don't have to have all that to get a very decent fluence, 10 to the 12 neutrons per second. We had several sessions, very interesting, very big sessions on medical applications, and Dr. Cutler is going to talk later, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. She will talk later more about it, but I would like to just emphasize a few things. A lot of emphasis were given on production of radioisotopes with accelerators, both with very high energy proton machines, which are again just huge facilities, but also with small PET cyclotrons. Many of those are available nowadays in hospitals, but also production of some novel and exotic radionuclides using isotope separation, or again some rare beam factories. We had some very good presentations of radiotherapy with Electron Linux, and the availability of electron and proton centers worldwide, and also about accelerator produced neutrons, kind of relevant to the previous slide, that can be used for BNCT, boron neutron capture radiotherapy, that can be used to treat cancer. We also talked about environment a lot during this conference, and there are several accelerator-based techniques that allow us to sample the environmental samples, water, air, soil. You can basically see how contaminated all these samples are. You can see various elements ranging from hydrogen to uranium across basically the whole periodic table, and that allows to answer a very interesting question: how bad is our air? How clean? How dirty is it? What about water? What about all different matrices, food, etc.? We had a very nice presentation. It was actually the keynote speaker talking about the hidden sources of greenhouse gases. When we're talking now, as we have a lot of drought all over the world, and we have to tap into the groundwater, some aquifers that haven't been used in the past, and sometimes a lot of organic matter is dissolved in it, and as you start getting water from underground, you actually release a lot of CO2, a lot of other organic matter and gases, and that contributes to the greenhouse effect. And that can be a real problem that not many people are aware of. And finally, a very interesting topic is radiation treatment of waste. This has been around for quite a long time in the agency. We have several projects that target treatment of biohazards. How can you treat waste from the cities, sludge, wastewaters before you can reuse it to be a fertilizer, for example? How can you treat discharges from pharmaceutical companies that contain a lot of antibiotics and some other emerging organic pollutants? How can you treat some wastewaters from farms where a lot of animals are also giving a lot of antibiotics, or wastewater from waste gas, flue gas from ships? So we had a lot of excellent presentations that address these questions, and radiation can break down chemical bonds between these hazardous molecules and make the wastewaters much safer. Cultural heritage is something that most people don't think radiation can be useful for, but actually it is. And there are several techniques that can help us to answer various questions. So for example, we can preserve cultural heritage objects by irradiating some very rare objects, some very rare, let's say some old books, some wooden objects which can be affected by mold, by bugs, by parasites. Irradiating them allows you to very effectively kill these parasites, kill the mold, and preserve these objects for future generations. It can also help you to detect some art forgeries. For example, you can see here a statue of Apoximenes, and there was an excellent presentation that discussed how radiation helped to address if this is the original statue or that's a much later copy of that. What is the origin of that? And you can do this analysis without destroying the object, which is important. And then you can say that, okay, this is how old this statue is. These are the alloys used to make it. And you can say then with very high degree of certainty, so yes, this is an actual Roman original, or this is something that was made much later. Another example, you can see a rather famous painting of Laguerre, and there were a lot of concerns about, is it really fake, or so is it real original, or is it a fake? So there was an AMS, accelerator mass spectroscopy analysis performed. The concentration of carbon-14 increased. If you look at this graph at the bottom, so you can see how the concentration of carbon didn't change much over years until it spiked around 1960s because of all the tests of nuclear weapon done by the US, Soviet Union, and some other countries as well. And then it dropped around 1970, and since then it drops because carbon-14 decays slowly. But basically, if you probe the canvas, the fibers of the canvas of the painting, you can say, okay, that corresponds to a particular period when this painting was made. So when they did the analysis of the painting, they found the number of 130. So that's this horizontal line there, which tells you that the painting should be made either around 1980s or around 1960s. Unfortunately, Laguerre, the painter, died in the 1950s. So basically it tells you there is no way he could do this painting. And that tells you immediately that the painting is opaque. This is just one example. In reality, there are hundreds of paintings which are attributed to famous artists. And museums have a lot of paintings that are reluctant to display because they are not sure about the origin, and accelerator technologies can help there. Sorry about the detour, but it's a fascinating topic, and I'm always excited talking about it. We talked also during this conference about regulatory aspects. And that's a very big question because a lot of facilities which are transitioning from sources to accelerators, they face the same problem, that the regulatory bodies sometimes they have no specific requirements that or requirements don't exist in their national framework, and they're not sure how to license new facilities, what should be the solution. So for inspection of facilities, it requires some challenges, and they need to adjust their framework for the evolving technology. I'm sorry. Finally, I would like to talk about some side events. We had 4 side events. The first one was focused on the IAEA collaborating centers. IAEA doesn't have its own, we do have our own laboratory, but we rely on our collaborating centers a lot as they help us to promote the nuclear technologies by hosting a lot of training activities, a lot of research activities. So we had a very nice side event to talk about it. We had a side event to promote self-reliance and sustainability of nuclear institutions. We also had a side event dedicated to the position, role, and achievement of movement and accelerator-based science, which is also very interesting. And again, Cathy might be able to answer some questions as she was part of it, involved a lot in it. We talked about how to improve how to increase the number of women in science and STEM disciplines, and how to improve their participation, how to make it easier, and how to help them use their potential, including different scholarships that are available nowadays and so on. And finally, we talked about recent developments of accelerator-based sources of radiation for industrial purposes. That was a very interesting event, which we structured to discuss 3 types of sources: neutron sources, electron sources, and X-ray sources for different applications. And we talked about replacing of the isotope-based sources with the accelerator-based sources. So we have participants, 2 of the participants were from the private companies, from Radioisotope, based in the USA, and from IBA, which are producers of accelerators equipped with the X-ray converter. And we also had a very nice presentation from CE in France, which discussed compact neutron sources. Actually, the second slide I showed was from that presentation, saying that the big labs are actually giving a lot of input for smaller sources that can be used towards industrial applications. And what we can see here is that there is a lot of progress lately, especially given very high prices of cobalt and limited availability. A lot of progress has been made in design of compact electron accelerators to serve as a source of electrons directly or X-rays. And we hope that the trend will continue. Finally, I would like to say that the conference was very broad. I wasn't able to mention all the topics. We had excellent presentations to discuss the material science, how accelerators can be used to develop new materials, to test them for radiation damage, for novel generation for reactors, for example, or for other applications. We had an excellent session on nuclear data to discuss the necessity of measuring cross-sections and all the other excitation functions for all the applications. Food and agriculture is a very big topic, and I hope Suresh can talk more about it, but absolutely accelerators play an essential role there. And also talked about education and what needs to be done to spread the word and disseminate the information about accelerators, their pros and cons, and also talked about economics. Very often accelerators sound great, but economically they're still not the best solution. So how to estimate, how to do the cost efficiency estimates, and also how to improve public perception. So all these topics were discussed. We also talked a lot about how IAEA can support it, because the conference was organized by IAEA, and specifically how we can support it either via collaborating centers, through coordinated research projects and technical cooperation projects, what kind of training opportunities can be offered, publications and databases, etc. One of the things I would like to mention is that the new ion beam facility in Cybersdorf will most likely be constructed. This is still under consideration. You can see a question mark, but it looks like everyone attending the conference was an agreement that this is necessary, and we hope to see it soon. And we are also looking forward to the second conference in 2024. There is no date yet, but given the success of the first one, one of the several recommendations from the participants were that let's repeat it. And hopefully in 2024, it can be fully in person, because while virtual events are great, the in-person events are even better. So again, that was a great event. I was very happy to be part of that, and I'm looking forward for the next one. And I encourage all of you to keep an eye for the next conference, and hope to see all of you there, and we'll be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Valeriia. That's just fascinating. It's amazing how much innovation there is that comes with this technology that we basically don't know about, and also the fact that we have the compact accelerators, which potentially will help to increase the access to this technology, and hopefully make it also more in future. I was also, thank you for highlighting also the challenges surrounding the regulators, and that even though this technology does not have the security challenges associated with nuclear and other radioactive material, there are still challenges facing the regulators which need to be facilitated to ensure that the uptake of these technologies in all countries is possible. So now to hear a bit more about medical isotopes and how we can use accelerators to increase medical isotope production, which I'm sure, as you all know, is quite a challenge globally. Dr. Cathy Cutler will talk to us, and she's the director of the Medical Isotope Research, Production and Development Group at Brookhaven National Laboratory. Her research focuses on developing production and separation methods for high specific activity radioisotopes, creating a suite of diagnostics and therapeutic agents tailored for individual needs, which has been funded by the DOE, the NIH, the NSF, and public foundations. So Cathy brings more than 20 years of experience in the development and evaluation of radiopharmaceuticals, utilizing both diagnosis and therapy.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Okay. So are you seeing the slides correctly? Okay, so thank you. Yeah, so I was asked to really try to give, I guess, a deeper that there's growing demand for these isotopes in both diagnosis and therapy. And we are needing to have an increase in our production capabilities. And that some of that was addressed during the session. And we're talking about increasing production capabilities, particularly in countries that currently have limited access, and some of what the impacts of that growth is. And then talk about some of the larger accelerator facilities and some of the research they're doing, as I was pointing out in the previous talk, and looking at some of the exotic nuclides or non-standard nuclides that are particularly of interest for doing therapy. So assuming that we have a broad audience, I thought it might be important to provide a little bit of background. So radiopharmaceuticals are really drugs that contain radioactive atoms. And these are either radioactive atoms that decay, that give off photons and X-rays, which we can utilize for really imaging or diagnosis, or they decay giving off particles, and those particles can break bonds and result in sterilization of the cells, which can result in therapy for patients. Now, the real advantage of using radiopharmaceuticals, particularly for diagnostics, is that we use them in very small amounts. So we're normally talking like picomolar or nanomolar amounts. And the importance of this is that they don't have any pharmacological effect. So they're not changing the system that we're looking at, which is really unique. So what this allows us to do is to kind of be a bystander. And what we're doing is really imaging in vivo function. So we're not just taking a picture of the heart, but we're looking at really how that heart is functioning and the biological processes. And by understanding those processes through imaging, it gives the physician an ability at a very early stage of abnormalities of seeing these and being more effective in the treatments that they can give, and understanding how those patients are responding to those treatments to ensure that they're actually effective. Additionally, we are working on what are really called therapeutic radiopharmaceuticals, which deliver radiation therapy and allow us to really do sterilization, particularly in cases where surgery and other types of treatments really aren't effective. And this is really growing in what we are calling targeted therapy applications, in which we incorporate therapeutic radionuclides into organic molecules that we know are selectively taken up by diseased tissue, which thereby really limits the dose to those tissues, giving particularly patients who have disease that's present in multiple sites opportunities for therapy that they don't have with other standard techniques. And what we're starting to see with some of these exotic radionuclides is that patients that aren't responding to anything are really responding to these nuclides. And so part of what we're looking at is developing accelerators that will allow us to produce these in quantities that we can really have an impact on these patients. So in the US, we have more than 20 million nuclear medicine procedures that are performed in the US. And this is about 50% of the global market. So if you double these numbers, you can kind of understand where we stand rolled around. Nuclear medicine is about $2 million US per year. It is really growing. And this is due to the tremendous health benefits that patients see, but also due to the huge economic impact. And where what we're seeing currently is a number of agents are being improved, and a number of large radiopharmaceutical companies are now investing in this area based on what they're seeing. So in nuclear medicine imaging, there's a number of applications that are used, and there's really two techniques. We have SPECT, which is single photon emission computed tomography, or PET, which is positron emission tomography. And these are just different ways of actually kind of collimating the photons that come out and allowing us to develop an image. And what you're actually looking at here is a patient who's being imaged with FDG. So what these images allow us to do is allow us to detect cancer, and also to see if it's spread to multiple sites within the body, and to inform how we should treat it and if it's really responding. It allows us to look at cardiovascular disease, such as when someone's undergone a heart attack. Additionally, we can use it for diagnosing a number of neurological disorders, such as looking at Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease, looking at stroke, or even if someone's having a seizure, where the loci is located. And then looking at how the liver or the kidney is functioning, and how we can more or less address increasing that. We can look at infection or trauma, and look at these at very early stages. And then we can identify endocrine disorders. Now, when it comes to how isotopes are produced, Isotopes are either produced using nuclear reactors, in which we use the neutrons to add neutrons to change to get the isotope of interest, or we can use accelerators. And accelerators produce beams such as beams of protons, deuterons, or a variety of elements which we can bombard targets and thereby produce the isotope of interest. Now, another way that isotopes are actually provided are through what are called generators. And generators really consist of a parent isotope that has a fairly long half-life that can decay to the daughter of interest. And so often these involve absorbing the parent onto some type of column. And then upon decay, the daughter can be eluted off. And so this generator is portable and can be shipped to remote areas. So they're often referred to kind of as a portable food source, kind of like a cow that you can milk and elute to get milk. In this case, you're eluting it to get the isotope of interest. And so it allows remote areas to really have access to these isotopes. And so one of the generators that have been most used is the Tech-Moly generator, and that's due to the ability to incorporate the isotope that decays to technetium-99m that gives off photons that are easily detectable using sodium iodide crystals. The radioactive technetium can be incorporated into organic molecules, given properties that allows it to be selectively uptaken through biological functions. And by doing this, we can do things like Serotek was an agent. It's a lipophilic neutral agent that can be taken up in the brain. It allows us to image stroke or seizure sites from epilepsy. Cardiolite, which is a technetium sestamib compound, is a positive lipophilic compound that is taken up in the heart. And this allows us to visualize areas of blockage. And physicians can thereby see those and then go in to correct it. Also, by incorporating technetium into phosphonate compounds, these compounds are taken up a highly metabolic bone. Particularly, this is used for imaging patients who have cancer to see if the cancer is actually spread to the bone, and it's actually used often for children. Now, for molecular imaging, what we can do, again, is that we can utilize this for visualization. So we're fairly lucky that our bodies are symmetric, and so we can more or less look at the abnormalities and determine where things are coming up, like looking at brain scans. We can additionally use it for characterization. And so, for instance, patients who have Parkinson's disease, what we see is that there's a variance in the dopamine receptor uptake. So as people get Parkinson's, the uptake in that receptor drops. And so we can characterize or quantitate this uptake. And then we can more or less see the impact to these patients given by drugs. So we can see if it's effective or not. And then finally, we can utilize it to basically quantitate or measure biological functions. And here we see a tumor in the liver. And so by imaging this, we can quantitate this uptake, determine what drugs we can give, and then determine if it's being effective. And one of the growing areas currently is actually the use of radiopharmaceuticals and actually treating patients. And so here you can see this is a patient that has gastroenteropancreatic neuroendocrine tumors. And one of the challenges with these is these patients upon diagnosis have tumors spread throughout. And so they have limited options. And this patient initially was undergoing beta therapy, which was not working. So they switched the patient over to bismuth-213, which is an alpha emitter. And so what you can see is the images, initially the image showing the tumors spread throughout the body. And then you can see it after treatment where the tumor burden has dropped, showing that these patients are responding effectively to this. And one of the challenges is really getting enough of this material to actually get these types of treatments into clinical trials. So when we make these radiopharmaceuticals, we have to start with our accelerators or reactors. We produce the isotopes. The isotopes are then taken into enclosures called hot cells. And then the targets are processed to get out the desired isotope. The isotope is then incorporated into organic molecules, making the radiopharmaceuticals. These radiopharmaceuticals then undergo radioanalytical testing to make sure they're the right purity and contain the correct molecules so that they can then be injected into patients. So part of the challenges is really having enough of these facilities to really produce isotopes. And so here you can see worldwide we have about 1,200 cyclotrons, which feed into about 5,600 PET scanners. And one of the challenges that was alluded to actually by our moderator is that we have limited access of these accelerators really in certain areas of the world. So in Western countries, we tend to have a high rate of these accelerator cyclotrons and access to patients to the treatments that these deliver. But what we heard at this meeting is that in certain areas, the number of cyclotrons are very low, such as in India, where you have a population of 1.4 billion and only about 21 cyclotrons that are serving this entire area, and 333 PET scanners. So what this means is that you have 4.2 million are being served by one PET scanner, or 0.24 PET scanners per million. So showing you that there's really limited access to these patients, to these valuable treatments. And so they demonstrated that in Kerala, which is an area of India, it's often called the Garden State, they had built a new cyclotron facility designed for really making some of the standard isotopes that are used for making these radiopharmaceuticals. So when they first started out in 2011, they had one PET scanner. They built this cyclotron facility, which came online in 2016, which is shown in the blue dot here. And then in the pink dot, you can see where the PET scanners are located. So this came online in 2016, along with 5 additional PET scanners, bringing the total to 6. And then over time, due to this cyclotron being there, they've been able to increase the number of PET scanners to 16, reducing that ratio from 0.17 to 0.45. So really bringing these techniques available to this population. Now, looking forward, what they know is that in this area, they're expecting that the population is going to increase to over 36 million by 2027. So this means in order to meet this, that the Koala needs to increase their PET scanners to 36 to really ensure access to all to these diagnostic nuclear medicine. So they're already working towards building a second cyclotron facility to help in supporting these additional PET scanners to ensure access to these important radionuclides. Now, another area that was highlighted was looking at how nuclear medicine and isotope production was actually changing in Brazil. So Brazil, actually, like many areas, originally was supported largely by accelerator facilities that were supported at government facilities, which was utilizing their unique expertise and workforce to really support this and provide these isotopes to the population. As technologies have increased and become more user-friendly, it's enabling the development of private facilities which are bringing on these accelerators, which are enabling increasing the production and increasing the availability of these isotopes and cyclotrons. So what you can see here is that they've increased from 4 cyclotrons up to 17 in 2022. And so as these new facilities are coming online, these modern facilities, they're bringing in modern equipment and approaches. They're allowing them to increase the development of radiopharmaceuticals to Brazil. And what they're further doing is engaging with research agreements with the universities that is allowing them to focus on the training, because they're really needing to increase the workforce that they need to support these facilities. And so they have agreements with like 4 cyclotrons that are located in the university campuses. So the other challenge that they're seeing is that as they're bringing this up, as was referred to in the previous talk, is that the regulatory burden to Brazil to really support and inspect and make sure that these facilities are meeting the required regulatory compliance is requiring that they need to increase the number of people who have the expertise and the regulatory field to bring this on. And so they're working to develop contracts with universities to help improve this workforce development so that they can ensure that they don't become the limiting force in bringing these facilities online.
Cathy,
Now,
I'll ask you just to sum up quickly. Thanks. We're running out of time. Thanks so much.
okay. So one of the things we're working on is really developing therapeutic radionuclides to look at targeted alpha therapies. So this is requiring the large accelerator facilities to really increase their capabilities. So in the US, the Department of Energy really has 3 accelerators facilities, the Blip, Lanel, and Argon, that are utilizing their accelerators for making actinium-225. In diagnostics, they're increasing their hot cell facilities. And the Argon facility is looking at Electron LINAC, which is bringing on new capabilities. Additionally, the facility for rare isotope beams has protons, or has beams that they can look on from protons up to uranium. And they have, they're producing unique isotopes in their water beams. So they're looking at isotope harvesting, where they're harvesting the isotopes out of this water and then cleaning it up and providing it for medical applications. And here you can see that the uranium-235 beam, you can see some of the isotopes that they're producing, which they can use for providing generators for producing alpha emitters, as well as therapeutic and diagnostic. So this is a really unique thing. Additionally, there are new isotopes that are new cyclotrons are coming online with higher energies, and they're using these unique isotope collection targets, which is allowing them to provide theranostic pairs to really provide these unique isotopes that you can't make any other way. And they're providing the opportunity to really train and form collaborations around the world to bring these on. And then finally, there's accelerators that are coming online at very high energies and producing isotopes via spallation and fission. And then they're using isotope mass separation that allows them to provide these targets very cleanly. And the PrisMap is serving as a way to focus these to really provide these isotopes around Europe. And here you can see some of the isotopes that they're providing, that without these high energies and isotope separation capabilities, these isotopes would not be available. And then finally, I wanted to highlight there's a new facility coming on at Partrack. And one of the things they're looking at is that accelerators are also used for delivering therapy. And they're looking at what they call flash irradiations, where they're providing high intensity short irradiations, which is proving to increase the therapeutic window to these patients, thereby being less toxic and more effective. So the point is that there's new cyclotrons coming on. They're adding capability to in new areas, as well as large facilities that are providing new capabilities to provide exotic radionuclides, particularly in the therapeutic ring, and they're basically filling the gap and increasing sustainability. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Cathy. That was fascinating, and it's really the first time I can understand exactly how isotopes are produced in radiopharmaceuticals. And what struck me was that sentence that that the health benefits and economic benefits are so tremendous. So I'm going to move now quickly to Dr. Suresh Pillai, who is the director of Texas A&M University's National Center for Electron Beam Research. and professor of microbiology at Texas A&M University. His current research and outreach activities are focused on harnessing e-beam technology for a wide variety of applications, including the development of vaccines, food pasteurization, and the remediation of environmental pollutants. His center is an IAEA collaborating center for electron beam research, and he is an ardent advocate of alternative technologies. And he's going to talk to us about food security and the contribution of these technologies for development. Thank you so much, Suresh.
Thank you, Ingrid. I hope you can hear me. Thank you also to those in the audience. It may be in different parts of the world, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So what Ingrid had asked me to talk about is how accelerator technologies, primarily electron beam and X-ray, can make a fundamental difference in the quality of lives of people around the world. And so for the next few slides, I'm just going to give you my perspective of how they can improve economics, food security, and also economic development. I want to also talk, I think it was the first speaker, Dr. Titus, who talked about food irradiation as well. So I'll touch in that as well. My belief is that food safety, food security, quarantine, food defense are shaping national priorities worldwide. I think ever since the pandemic has happened, it has come right front and center in all of our minds about sourcing of foods, the global sourcing of food, the global sourcing of ingredients. And this makes it almost a necessity that we have to think of food security and food defense. These were many years ago, probably a few decades ago, the privilege of well-developed countries or advanced economies. But today, I think every country, every nation on this earth has to be very, very concerned about food security. This is also being driven by climate change, new thinking of food security. We now know that countries and regions around the world can set up tariffs, can set up embargoes. So we really need to pay close attention to what's available. And it does not matter whether a country is the richest country on the face of the earth or the poorest country. There is a demand, there is a responsibility by the national leaders to provide for the citizens. Speaking about nuclear technologies, cobalt 60 based gamma radiation, electron beam X-rays, and E-beam technologies are the only proven non-thermal chemical-free technologies that countries have access to address food security, food safety, and food security. The reason because chemicals and other technologies, high pressure processing, microwave technologies, etc., just do not meet or do not live up to the advantages what these nuclear technologies do. When we talk of nuclear technologies, we have to be very clear-eyed. For over 55 to 60 years, cobalt 60 based gamma radiation has done a tremendous benefit to nations around the world. It has saved so many millions of lives, if not billions. It has kept so many millions fed. But what has happened is over the last few years, we now know that that technology is on its way out. We are seeing the sunset of that technology, not because the technology is ineffective, but because there are better technologies and more efficient technologies available. And if you look at the cost, if you look at the challenges associated with protection of this cobalt radioactive isotope, etc., these costs and challenges become insurmountable. So this is why we now talk about machine-generated or linear accelerator-based or accelerator-based technologies. And this can be broadly divided into two types of alternative technologies. One is the E-beam, and the other one is X-ray technologies. So when you talk about electron beam, this is a very simplistic cartoon figure of how electron beam technology is generated. You have a very high voltage using an electron injector, an E-gun. The electrons are accelerated through this accelerating cavity. The electrons are scanned with a magnetic scanner, and then you can get the product, the electron beam, treating the entire product. The advantage of this technology is that you can continue to do this treatment even through the boxes. So it's not necessary that the product has to be exposed. You can package it, you can treat it, and then right after treatment, this product can then be put on store shelves. The only difference between electron beam and X-ray, which may make a big difference is that you're converting electrons into X-ray photons using a tantalum shield. Here, the advantage of using X-ray is that rather than treating these single boxes with electron beam, you can use an entire palette. But the decision whether you want to use electron beam or X-ray is has to be very carefully thought out, because there are cost implications, etc. So it's not a very simple decision. Oh well, I need pallets to be treated, so I can use X-ray. For all practical purposes, electron beam is the most cost-effective, cheapest alternative to use ionizing technologies. So when we talk of alternative technologies for promoting or advancing food security, we can look at this in two areas: pre-harvest and post-harvest. Pre-harvest applications, and I'm focusing only on food in this particular instance. I'm not talking about environmental applications or medical device sterilizations, etc. that was mentioned earlier. I'm talking only about food. So when you talk about food, you can look at pre-harvest. Pre-harvest, you can use this technology for plant mutation breeding. You can use this for surface sterilization of seeds. You can use it also to sterilize soil so that the emerging seedlings are actually protected from other fungal infections so that the plant actually grows. For those of you who are familiar with agriculture, know that only a small percentage of the seeds actually germinate and become plants. So you can imagine the impact that you can have with this technology in plant productivity, agricultural productivity. The other major application of this technology is also in pre-harvest, but in terms of animals and insects. You can develop advanced vaccines for animals so that you have enhanced protection against infectious diseases. You have better nutritional uptake in these animals, and also for treating agricultural wastewater. Now, when you talk about post-harvest applications, and you can just imagine what the impact could be on a continent like Africa, when you can protect the seeds, you can protect the grains for long-term storage. And you're not talking about, Titus mentioned about 5 to 7 days of tomatoes. Absolutely correct. It can make a big difference for a farmer, whether they can keep it for a few more days to sell it. But talk about from a country's perspective, at a mega city perspective, that you can store grains for years. So you can talk about an instance where you can actually have very carefully thought out strategic planning that can protect regions of the world against food shortages by promoting this sort of technology for long-term storage of grains and cereals. Not only is the grain and cereals treated, but also you can make advanced packaging materials with this technology. And the other technology and the other application is what Titus had mentioned about the elimination of foodborne pathogens and increasing shelf life and reducing spoilage. So if you combine pre-harvest with post-harvest applications of this technology, it is just fundamentally can change the shape of nations and the people around the world. And this is why I'm a very ardent supporter of this technology, because it is significantly makes a difference in the quality of life of people around the world. I want to give you two case studies here. One is Pakistan and one is Mexico. Pakistan and Mexico exports mangoes to the United States. Mangoes from those two regions of the world, are especially from Pakistan, are extremely, sells for a very high premium in the United States. Similarly, the mangoes from Mexico. You can see the trend from 2008 to 2020. You can see the volume of ionizing technology being used on imported mangoes and fresh produce from Mexico. It is increasing significantly, almost in double-digit numbers. It's increasing. This is how the products come. They come in trucks. The mangoes are in packages. The mangoes in packages are put on this conveyor belt and then treated with electron beam at Texas A&M University's Electron Beam Center. And these mangoes can, not only are they tasty, not only can this technology allow them to come across national boundaries, but also they can have an extended shelf life. Pakistan has also been doing this for many years. In fact, in that instance, they cannot obviously use trucks. They actually use air freight and bring the mangoes from Karachi to Dubai, Dubai to Houston, and then it comes to Texas A&M for treatment. What is spectacular in this sort of a supply chain, effort is that within 30 to 40 hours of harvest, in Pakistan, the mangoes that are in the United States being readied for treatment. So these two countries, these two examples are that these mangoes and from Pakistan became very, very popular in the United States. So there were private industry, private entrepreneurs who are interested in saying that can they monetize this and develop electron beam facilities. So this is what has actually happened. And I want to give you an example. In Mexico, there were entrepreneurs from Houston who looked at the mango business and said, hey, look, we have this electron beam technology. We can build this in Mexico. They did not wait for the government of Mexico to invest in the technology. This was a private investment. And they said, you know what, let's go build it. But when they did the business case analysis, they realized that the first application for this should be in medical supplies because the return on investment was extremely high. So they already have been operating the first electron beam facility, commercial facility built in Mexico about 5 years ago. They have created approximately 45 direct new high-paying jobs that operates 3 shifts a day and about 1,000 indirect jobs all the way from logistics, catering, manufacturing. And once this technology and once these entrepreneurs became very comfortable with the technology, they started building the Mexico's second electron beam facility in Aguascalientes, which is going to be a larger facility than this, and once again going to have a direct economic impact. These two facilities are approximately a $12 million investment per facility. Some of you may think, oh, wow, that is a very large amount. But actually, if you look at the comparison of a hotel chain in the poorest part of the world, it is still much more than $12 million. So when you're looking at this like an investor, you have to be very, very clear-eyed as to understand you cannot compare apples and oranges. If you look at return on investment, these sorts of facilities have a much faster return on investment than any other type of a business opportunity. Pakistan, an example, they realized that they were actually going to use this technology for exporting mangoes, for creating, for treating spices, etc. And so they built, once again, a private group has built Pakistan's first electron beam facility about 3 years ago, probably, or 4 years ago. It has created about a 50 plus direct new jobs. It has created, once again, about 1,000 indirect jobs in all sorts of areas. And their focus has been in spices, medical supplies, and food ingredients. Guess what? The success of this facility spurred the government from investing in building a new electron beam facility in Lahore. So very soon, and this is under construction currently, so very soon Pakistan will have 2 e-beam facilities to serve the economic needs, not on exporting mangoes. This is very important. They are using this technology to provide a direct and clear benefits to its citizens. So what is happening around the world, the story is being replicated around the world. Each of these dots represents that this particular country has the technology. It doesn't mean that there's only one electron beam operation. But as you can see here, there is a growth of this technology all around the world. Unfortunately, the continent of Africa is an area that this technology still has not permeated into. And one of my goals, personal goals, is to make sure that this technology gets into all of Africa, because I really would like to see this technology feed the people in Africa. So this is the the future, as I see, of this technology is going to grow fast. The machines are there's going to be hopefully number of technology providers who will build these machines, and the cost of acquisition of this technology will improve. So with that, I'll end, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you once again, Ingrid, for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Suresh. That's fascinating as usual. And what I'm going to do with we don't have that much time left. So what I'm going to do is actually a bit different. I'm going to ask Nortin, representing the interests of the low and middle income countries, to ask questions to our panel. Nortin, take it away.
Okay, thank you. What wonderful presentations, and exactly these are the things that we are talking about in the Atomic Energy Board. And there's 2 pertinent things here. First of all, to Cathy, a country like Namibia actually relies on South Africa, and we, any radiopharmaceuticals are basically oversupply on their side. Secondly, we don't have many aircrafts coming in, so carriers that are licensed to carry radioactive medicines. So we're basically sitting in a small little island, but with only 2.5 million people. It's an enormous investment, for having, let's say, facilities to produce these pharmaceuticals. What would be your thoughts around people like us, this part of the world, small population, in dire need of these kind of treatment, investing in these kind of technologies? The other question I have for Suresh, the e-beams is a great new technology, and I think we'll take it offline a little bit. With regards to cobalt-60, the penetrating power of cobalt-60, how do e-beams and X-rays compete with that penetrative power of the cobalt-60 source? And secondly, what are the power requirements? As I've shown before, the stable electricity supply is few and far between in Africa. What do you think would be a strategy to have these kind of technologies available in Africa? Because we have got so many subsistence farmers, that are harvesting today, and it's got to be in the market tomorrow. There's no packaging, but the longer they get to be able to sell their produce, the more valuable their produce becomes to them, and the more they will invest in producing. But the more they lose, it just grows through to despondency and of course poverty and food insecurity. So those are my two questions. Thank you. Thank you, Ingrid.
So I'll let Cathy answer the first question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a set answer for you. I think, the challenges is, like, I know the IAEA reaches out to help. I know that, for instance, the Society of Nuclear Medicine, we have a grant with the Department of Energy where we reach out to countries to try to help them. The challenge is that really the economics of how medical treatments are delivered or paid for are really quite different for each country. And so you kind of have to somewhat work on a unique solution of how you're going to create the funding to really put in the infrastructure that you need to really support the availability. I think that if it comes to training and resources, other organizations can really help in and try to help with the training and the workforce. But it does get difficult to see how you come up with the economics that allow you to set up these really specialized facilities to really provide these isotopes. And I think that becomes something where you kind of need to partner with someone like the IAEA or maybe with the Society of Nuclear Medicine, and they can try to help you work through all the things that you need to consider when you want to bring up these facilities and what type of economic model works for you, particularly because different countries have different types of diseases that are prevalent. So what they're going to treat is actually going to be quite different. So I'm not sure it was greatly helpful, but I do realize the challenge that it takes to try to set that up.
Thanks, Cathy.
Yeah, thank you, Nortin, for those questions. There were two questions in there. One is the question is how do you support the subsistence farmers, etc., with this technology, because they're very small, the capex involved, and the secondary, the energy requirements. Let me address the first one. This technology is not supposed to be parachuted into a country. Along with the installation of this country, you have to modernize the supply chain. And the modernization of supply chain automatically will create several hundred new jobs. So everything has to be integrated. So the belief is that you don't put in this technology by itself. You basically integrate it with advanced supply chain and logistics. The second question is about the power requirements. Actually, we have a very interesting project going on with the Department of Energy, understanding what is the minimum requirement that's needed. What is surprising in our studies that we have realized so far, there are regions of the world where they're using this technology using just electrical generator gensets. For example, the Dominican Republic runs an entire electron beam facility on a generator set. The second more important point, and this is very, very important, many countries in Africa have very large data centers. These data centers suck up the same, if not more, electricity than an electron beam facility, and also suck up the same amount for cooling systems and other utilities. So wherever you have data centers, large data centers, you can be assured that there is enough electrical grid to supply electron beam facilities. And now these machines are becoming smaller, more efficient. So it's going to be a time when you're going to have very small machines and small modular machines that would not require, large footprint. Hope that answers your question, Nortin.
Thank you so much. I'm going to quickly turn to Valeriia. Valeriia, we heard that Cathy was saying basically that international cooperation, which I agree with, is key to making this technology more available, and that the IAEA has a central role in this regard. Do you have also, in closing, your closing remarks, can you say something about this? And then we'll turn to each of the other panelists for their closing remarks. Thanks.
Sure. And as I mentioned in my presentation, we have a variety of mechanisms to employ this assistance, this help. Basically, we have a lot of coordinated research projects which allow research groups from various universities and institutions to work on different projects, different research projects. We also have technical operations projects which are more focused for a particular country and particular topic. And finally, we have a lot of training and training opportunities for young professionals that can be used to help. So yeah, there are a variety of mechanisms, and I agree that IAEA should be one of the major organizations to help, and I hope we're doing our job.
Thank you so much for that, Valeriia. So we know that nuclear science and technology can significantly contribute to sustainable development, but that the technology needs to be made more accessible and sustainable. And that accelerator-based and X-ray technologies can make a significant difference, right, to healthcare, to food security, and to economic development. We know also that there are challenges to the sustainable use of these technologies in developing countries. Dependence on electricity, a need for high-skilled workforce, and also there are some challenges related to the burden for the regulators. But all of this can be addressed, and international cooperation is key in this regard. And for closing comments, I'm going to turn to Nortin first, followed by Cathy, Suresh, and then Valeriia, if you have anything else to add. Thanks, Nortin.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the panelists for their wonderful presentations, also you, Ingrid, and then also for everybody that tuned in, and your comments that you've given. I really appreciate it, and it's really strengthening me as a person, promoting nuclear technologies for uptake in African countries. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Suresh?
My comment is that around the world, we should look at these technologies not as, oh, gee whiz, super complicated, but look at this as a business opportunity. Once you look at this as a business opportunity, things will change automatically.
Thank you. Cathy?
Yeah, so I just want to thank you for having the opportunity to talk, but I tend to agree with Suresh. I think we're actually really at a unique time where we're starting to see this switch over to this becoming more economically viable, and these technologies really being at a point that they can become a really good business model. And so I think they will be more accessible, and I think we're in for some really exciting times. So anyhow, thank you. I really enjoyed listening to the other talks.
Thank you so much, Valeriia.
I would like to echo everyone who said before me. It's been a great event, and thank you for all the presentations and for all the attendees, and obviously to you, Ingrid, and your colleagues for organizing this event. It's a great opportunity. I would like just to reiterate that we are hoping to have the second conference, and I hope that could be a very good platform. Maybe we can have a special side event focused on this, all questions, because one question is what is technically feasible, and a lot of things are technically feasible. This different question is what is economically feasible. And as a scientist, I'm more inclined to the first one, but I think we should also think about the second one. And I think that's all that we should be focusing on. So I'll keep everyone in the loop, and I hope to see all of you in 2024 here in Vienna, maybe in person, hopefully in person, and discussing this much further. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our fantastic panel. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in. This is such an exciting area of research and of application, and we really look forward to more discussions in this regard. And we will have all of the presentations will be available on our website, as well as the recording, so you could look at this carefully and in your own time. Thank you so much for coming and for spending your time with us today. Goodbye and have a lovely weekend. I think we're close enough to the weekend to say that. Goodbye. Thank you so much.